There are three major things that we didn't do that are still on our plate. One is that we have a special session that's still open on transportation that is looking for a way to find a funding vehicle to help us fix both our deteriorating roads and to improve our public transit systems. That special session is still open. It would require, in order to raise funds, we have to provide some kind of taxation. Those are 2/3 votes and very difficult to get in a legislature without a high level of cooperation, and we haven't achieved that at this point. And then finally, we also did not adopt a spending plan for cap and trade dollars. And 60% of the cap and trade dollars are permanently allocated on an ongoing basis to a variety of activities, including high-speed rail, and I'll comment on that in a minute. But 40% is discretionary annually to the legislature, and we've not agreed yet on what that 40% would be spent on in any way different from what we did last year. So that's something that we'll have to deal with when we get back to Sacramento in January. And then finally, let me talk a little bit about high-speed rail, and from the state perspective. The state has provided an ongoing funding source for high-speed rail through the cap and trade dollars. They have an annual allocation now. It is not sufficient for them to make huge progress, but it does provide enough of a funding stream that it is beginning to draw some private sector interest. No private sector dollars, and I think that would be a long way away, but some interest at least, because they see that there is some kind of more permanent commitment on the part of the state. I will point out two things. One is that the whole cap and trade program and the funds from cap and trade are still subject to a lawsuit that has not yet been settled or ruled upon, and so the cap and trade program could be thrown out by the courts, could be deemed to not have been adopted in the appropriate manner, and so the state could be on the hook for returning funds if the lawsuit goes against the state relative to the expenditure of cap and trade. But for now, the state is operating as if it has the legal authority until the court tells it otherwise, and is spending the cap and trade dollars. Recently, the high-speed rail issued a request to the private sector for whether there was interest in the high-speed rail programs. There were 36 expressions of interest received from companies around the world in various forms of participation. Be clear that this doesn't commit, there's no commitment to contracts or even negotiating with any of these 36 entities. The high-speed rail folks look at it as if they've got about $5 to $10 million worth of free consulting from private companies who gave them advice about some things they might consider. Importantly, from my perspective, one of the things that I have been working on at the state level is trying to assure that there is a funding source for grade separations. And I have submitted a letter. I spent personal time with the chair of the budget committee that deals with transportation, asking that we get specific language in a final cap and trade expenditure plan for this year and ongoing that would clarify that in the rail transportation program of cap and trade, that grade separations are an allowable expense, spelled out and specific. That would make it easier for jurisdictions to apply for those funds for the construction. And for me, at least, in this corridor, even if we never got high-speed rail and we only work towards the goal of electrifying Caltrain, we need to grade separate in every single location that we can. and we're going to need to get that done. It will be imperative if we do that, if we have high-speed rail, but I think even under electrification we need to get it done. These projects are very, very expensive. I think the state has a role to play in helping to pay for these, and I will continue to advocate for that in my role. Let me stop there and take questions.
With all the cap and trade money you mentioned, do you think there's any way we can get that separate funding source? I mean, this will reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Right. Candidly, I think it's less likely that we would be able to get cap and trade dollars for a dedicated funding stream for Caltrain. Because then we'd have to figure out how to get a dedicated funding stream for several other rail lines, including the new one that's going to start in the North Bay, the Metro Link in LA. So I'm not sure that we get there, but I think it is possible to get some of those dollars, and I hope it's possible to get some of those dollars for some of the infrastructure needs that we need that will improve the system.
All right, thank you.
The cap and trade dollars for housing are always a little bit of a dicey proposition, because with cap and trade, you've got to find a nexus, clear nexus to greenhouse gas reductions. So transit-oriented development is really what we funded with cap and trade, because we think we can make the nexus to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. But any other housing that is in some other, someplace not near transit, someplace that we can't really demonstrate that it reduces greenhouse gas emissions, it's hard to use cap and trade dollars for that.
So those kind of two.
The rest of that was cap and trade.
Oh, cap and trade. You want? Yeah. Let me just. As part of the implementation of our greenhouse gas program in California, the Air Resources Board established a mechanism where if you are continuing to exceed the standards, you pay a fee for that. That fee is what we're collecting in the cap and trade dollars. The businesses who are being charged that and the California Chamber of Commerce on their behalf sued the state, saying that it's not a fee, which requires only a simple majority vote, but it's a tax, which would require a 2/3 vote. That's the issue that's being discussed in the courts, and the court will eventually determine whether it's appropriately labeled a fee or should have been labeled a tax, and that will determine the future of that.
Kind of several questions around high-speed rail, and so maybe I'll just go through them and you can pick and choose. So first, we just talked about it a week ago, and we really focused on CSS, context-sensitive solutions. I think we feel like we have a commitment there, and I guess it's less of a question than a comment. We really want to move forward with that, and if you can help make that happen, I think that would be appreciated. Second, we're really not sure why the High-Speed Rail Authority is kind of pivoted to the northern route, and I don't know if you can shed any light on that. I think they're going to be coming out with their updated business plan soon, and so we'd hope that you guys would scrutinize that plan and look at those assumptions. And in terms of cap and trade, I thought high-speed rail was getting 25% of that until 2020, but it wasn't permanent. And before it becomes permanent, again, I think really knowing that they have a viable plan to get there, and I hope that you at the state level will kind of insist on that.
Yeah.
So if you have any comments on any of those.
So first of all, I've made it fairly clear to the leadership of the High-Speed Rail Authority that there has got to be a fairly extensive process and environmental review process for any work in this corridor. So I think I'm in support of what this council wants around making sure that we get the kind of review that engages people and really produces an environmental document that is sensitive to the region. So I'm committed to that. You are, I think, correct around the fact that high-speed rail gets 25% of the cap and trade, and I think it is to 2020. I think in the minds of the legislature that's permanent. I know it isn't that way.
I think there's a
but-
discussion to make it even more permanent,
Yeah.
which,
And, that'll be revisited at some future point, but we're not there yet. And I am looking forward to looking at the revised business plan. At this point, the commitment of high-speed rail is that, Central Valley, then Southern California, then Northern California. So until the business plan is changed, that's where they need to be doing.
can you shed any light on why it feels like they kind of quickly switched gears and started pushing hard on the CIR?
I don't, I know that they're also doing, work in Southern California, so I don't know that it may feel to them sequenced, but I don't know that it feels that way to us here.
Thanks.
High-speed rail, I just want to get some kind of clarification on this, that when you're talking about that the design of high-speed rail would have, and the environmental review would have to be something, and that you've always been very supportive of this, which is much appreciated, would have to do with what's best for our region as well in this review. And I just want to make sure that that's inclusive of context-sensitive solutions. And that was the intention of some of that comment?
Yeah. I happen to think that's the right approach. Whether we can continue to maintain a commitment and guarantee that high-speed rail does that, I can't guarantee you at the moment, but that's certainly something that I believe is a best approach.
Okay, great. And